I taught him everything about the job. He couldn't open an Excel spreadsheet or speak to major clients without stumbling over basic terminology. 6 months later, he was the one who signed the termination letter that ended the career I'd built over 7 years. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. What they don't tell you is that sometimes the universe delivers your enemy right to your doorstep, resume in hand, begging for the very expertise they once discarded. My name is Rachel Monroe, and until 6 months ago, I was the backbone of the strategic planning department at Bancroft and Fairchild, one of Denver's most prestigious financial consulting firms. At 36, I'd earned my stripes through 7 years of late nights, complex negotiations, and turning impossible deadlines into successful deliverables. I wasn't just good at my job, I was the person others turned to when they needed someone who could handle the pressure. That Tuesday morning in March started like any other. I arrived at the office at 7:30 a.m., already mentally preparing for the quarterly review presentation. The Denver skyline gleamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our 17th floor office, and I remember thinking how far I'd come from my early days as a junior analyst. "Rachel, got a minute?" Margaret Hayes, our HR director, stood at my office door with that particular expression that meant something unpleasant was coming. Behind her stood a young man, maybe 25, wearing an expensive suit that didn't quite fit his lanky frame. "This is Eric Dalton," Margaret said, her voice carrying that forced cheerfulness HR people master. "He'll be joining us as an associate manager in strategic planning. Mr. Dalton, Senior Mr. Dalton, has asked that you personally oversee his onboarding and training. Senior Mr. Dalton, our new CEO, who'd taken over 3 months ago after a hostile board takeover." The unspoken message hung in the air like smoke. This is the boss's son. And you will make this work. Eric extended his hand with the confidence of someone who'd never had to earn anything. "Looking forward to learning from the best," he said, flashing a smile that probably worked on college girls but just made me tired. "Of course," I replied, shaking his hand. "When do we start?" "Right now, if that works for you," Margaret said, already backing toward the door. Eric's eager to dive in. And that's how it began. The man who would eventually destroy my career stood in my office, fiddling with his phone, completely oblivious to the irony of his next words. "So, I have to be honest," Eric said once Margaret left. "I don't really know much about financial consulting. Dad says you're the one who can get me up to speed fast. I'm a quick learner, though." I studied him for a moment. Designer shoes, platinum watch, the kind of casual arrogance that comes from never hearing the word no. But I'd trained a difficult people before. I'd managed ego-driven clients and navigated office politics. How hard could one nepotism hire be? "Let's start with the basics," I said, pulling up a chair next to my computer. "Do you know how to build a financial model in Excel?" He laughed. Actually laughed. "Excel? Isn't that what assistants are for?" I should have seen it then, the red flags waving frantically in the wind. But I was good at my job, proud of my ability to transform even the most hopeless cases into competent professionals. My reputation was built on being the person who could handle anything. "In this role, you'll need to understand every aspect of what your team does," I explained patiently. "Let's start with opening a basic spreadsheet." For the next 3 months, I poured everything I knew into Eric Dalton's empty vessel of a brain. I taught him financial terminology, client relations, project management, team dynamics. I stayed late to review his work, rewrote his emails, covered for his mistakes with clients. I even created detailed guides and cheat sheets that he could reference. Slowly, painfully, he began to improve. He learned to navigate Excel, to speak confidently in meetings, to present ideas with authority. The transformation was remarkable, and I felt that familiar pride of a teacher watching a student succeed. What I didn't notice was how he'd started presenting my strategies as his own in leadership meetings I wasn't invited to. How he'd begun taking credit for projects I'd spent weeks developing. How his father beamed with pride at his son's natural business instincts while I sat in my office, doing the actual work. The Washington account was what sealed my fate. It was a complex financial restructuring for a tech startup, the kind of project that required deep analysis and creative solutions. I'd spent 2 months building the framework, and Eric had watched me every step of the way. I thought I was teaching him. I didn't realize I was training my replacement. Impressive work on the Washington account, the CEO said to his son during an all-hands meeting while I sat in the back row. Your innovative approach really sealed the deal. Eric stood at the podium, wearing confidence like that ill-fitting suit he'd worn on his first day, now replaced by perfectly tailored Armani. Thank you, Mr. Dalton. I believe in leading from the front and showing the team what's possible. My team, my strategies, my late nights, his glory. But I kept quiet. You don't survive 7 years in corporate America without learning when to pick your battles. I told myself it was temporary, that once Eric felt secure, he'd acknowledge my contributions. I was building political capital, I reasoned, playing the long game. I was playing checkers while he was playing chess, and I didn't even know I was on the board. The 3 months of training, Eric became a masterclass in patience and self-delusion. Every morning, he'd swagger into my office with his venti cappuccino and designer laptop bag, ready to absorb whatever knowledge I could pour into him. At first, his incompetence was almost charming, like watching a toddler try to use chopsticks. So, when we say leverage ratio, what exactly are we leveraging? He asked during week 2. His brow furrowed in genuine confusion. I explained, again, the basic principles of financial leverage. I drew diagrams. I created analogies involving his favorite sports cars. Slowly, the concepts began to stick, though I suspected it was more memorization than true understanding. What Eric lacked in aptitude, he made up for in networking. While I was teaching him the difference between EBITDA and net income, he was having lunch with board members. While I reviewed his practice presentations at 8 p.m., he was at cocktail parties with potential clients, armed with my talking points. You're doing great work with Eric, Margaret from HR told me one afternoon. His father is very pleased with his progress. Thanks, I replied, not mentioning the 16-hour days or the way Eric had started calling me at home with urgent questions that were usually just him wanting me to write his reports. By month 2, something shifted. Eric began interrupting me during our sessions, finishing my sentences with information I'd taught him the week before. He'd present concepts to me as if he'd discovered them himself, forgetting that I'd drawn the same frameworks on my whiteboard days earlier. I've been thinking, he said one morning, leaning back in my chair. He'd started sitting at my desk during our sessions. The Morrison account needs a more aggressive approach. I'm going to propose we restructure their debt portfolio using a ladder strategy. The same ladder strategy I'd outlined for him the previous Thursday. That's a solid approach, I managed, watching him type notes into his phone. I thought so, he said, already mentally accepting accolades for my idea. The pattern became predictable. I'd develop a strategy, walk Eric through it, and watch him present it as his own innovation in the Monday leadership meetings. At first, I told myself it was part of the training process. He needed confidence. He needed wins. What did it matter whose ideas they were, as long as the client benefited? It mattered when promotion season came around. Rachel, you've been instrumental in our team's success. My direct supervisor, James, said during my review, but leadership feels you've been too focused on training rather than innovation. Eric's fresh perspectives have really energized the department. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the ground shift beneath me. 7 years of building my reputation, and it was being dismantled by someone who couldn't calculate compound interest without my cheat sheet. I understand, I said. Because what else could I say? That the golden boy was a fraud? That every fresh perspective had come from my desk. The Washington account was the crown jewel, a $50 million restructuring deal that required sophisticated modeling and delicate client relations. I'd cultivated that relationship for 3 years, nurturing it from a small advisory role to this massive opportunity. I want you to lead this, James told me, but include Eric. It'll be good for his development. I threw myself into the project. The model I built was elegant, complex, and bulletproof. I walked Eric through every assumption, every calculation, every nuance of the client's position. He took notes, asked surprisingly good questions, and seemed genuinely engaged. The presentation to the client was scheduled for a Thursday. On Tuesday, Eric came to my office. "Hey, Rachel, family emergency," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "My dad needs me to fly to Chicago tomorrow. You can handle the presentation solo, right?" "Of course," I said, relieved. Better to present my own work without worrying about Eric fumbling a question. Wednesday afternoon, James called me into his office. Slight change of plans. Eric managed to resolve his family issue, so he'll be leading the Washington presentation tomorrow. His father wants to see him take point on a major deal. But you'll be there to support, of course. Think of it as the final test of your training. I sat in that conference room the next day, watching Eric present my work with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He fielded questions using my prepared responses, pointed to my financial models as examples of his team's capabilities, and closed the deal with a handshake that should have been mine. "Exceptional work," the client said, pumping Eric's hand. "Bancroft and Fairchild is lucky to have someone with your vision." Eric's vision, my models, my strategies, my relationship. But the real betrayal came the following Monday. I arrived at the office to find my keycard deactivated. Security handed me a box, already packed, and a termination letter. The signature at the bottom, Eric Dalton, Acting Director of Strategic Planning. The letter cited performance issues, failure to meet departmental goals, and inability to adapt to new leadership directions. It was corporate speak for, "You're no longer useful." I sat in my car in the parking garage, holding that letter, watching my hands shake. Not from sadness, from rage. Pure, crystallized rage at my own naivety. I'd trained him. I'd elevated him. I'd literally handed him the knife he used to stab me in the back. The security guard knocked on my window. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to leave the premises." I looked up at the building where I'd spent 7 years building my career, then down at the box holding the remnants of it. Somewhere up on the 17th floor, Eric Dalton was probably sitting in my office, feet up on my desk, basking in his successful coup. "Ma'am." "I'm going," I said, starting the engine. "I'm definitely going." But as I drove away from Bancroft and Fairchild for the last time, one thought burned through the shock and humiliation. Eric Dalton had learned everything from me, except the most important lesson. Never underestimate the person who made you. The drive from Denver to Redfield, New Mexico, took 8 hours. 8 hours of watching the Rocky Mountains fade into high desert, of rest stops where I avoided my reflection in bathroom mirrors, of phone calls I didn't answer. My sister Anna lived in a small adobe house on the outskirts of town. Population 1,847, where the biggest financial institution was a credit union that closed at 3 p.m. "Stay as long as you need," Anna said, helping me carry boxes into her spare room. She didn't ask questions. Sisters know when words won't help. The first week, I didn't leave the house. I sat on Anna's back porch, staring at the mesa, trying to process how I'd gone from managing multi-million-dollar portfolios to being unemployed in a town where the main street had 3 stoplights. My savings would last 6 months if I was careful. The retirement fund I'd built could be cracked open, but the penalties would eat half of it. "You need to eat something," Anna said, setting a plate of enchiladas in front of me. "I trained him," I said, the words tumbling out. "I gave him everything. My knowledge, my time, my strategies. And he's an asshole," Anna said simply, "but you can't live in the past." She was right, of course, but knowing something and feeling it are different beasts entirely. By week 3, the paralysis began to crack. I started applying for positions, tailoring my resume to hide the abrupt ending at Bancroft and Fairchild. The responses were predictable. We've decided to go with a candidate whose experience more closely matches our needs. The position has been filled internally. We'll keep your resume on file. Corporate speak for, we called your previous employer. I knew Eric, or his father, had poisoned the well. In Denver's tight-knit financial community, Bancroft and Fairchild's word carried weight. One bad reference could kill a career. And mine was bleeding out in the high desert of New Mexico. So I adapted. I started taking freelance work, small business consulting, helping local entrepreneurs with basic financial planning. The pay was a fraction of what I'd made, but it kept me sharp. I helped a local restaurant restructure their debt, advised a startup brewery on their expansion financing, built models for a solar panel installation company. You're too good for this, Miguel, the brewery owner, said after I'd saved him $60,000 in unnecessary loan fees. Why are you here? Life happens, I told him, which was easier than explaining corporate betrayal to someone who'd never worked in an office. At night, I did something else. I studied. Not finance, I knew that cold. I studied corporate psychology, organizational behavior, the art of the job interview from the other side of the table. I learned how hiring managers think, how reference checks really work, how to build a reputation from scorched earth. I also kept tabs on Bancroft and Fairchild through LinkedIn and industry newsletters. The Washington account had been a success. Naturally, Eric was promoted to full director. The team I'd built was hemorrhaging talent. 3 senior analysts left within 2 months of my departure. The Morrison account, one I'd personally managed for 4 years, moved to a competitor. You're obsessing, Anna warned, finding me at 2 a.m. scrolling through Eric's LinkedIn updates. I'm researching, I corrected. For what? I didn't have an answer then. I just knew that this wasn't over, that somewhere between the grief and the rage was something harder and more useful. Patience. The freelance work taught me things my corporate career never had. I learned to hustle, to sell myself, to build trust from nothing. I discovered I could explain complex financial concepts to a rancher as easily as to a CEO. My network, which had seemed Denver-centric, turned out to have threads everywhere. I have a friend in Phoenix, one client mentioned. She's looking for someone to consult on a merger. Mind if I pass along your contact? Please do, I said, and meant it. Slowly, project by project, I rebuilt. Not my old life, that was gone, burned to ash by Eric Dalton's signature. But something new. Something that couldn't be taken away by someone else's insecurity or nepotism. 5 months into my exile, I was in the middle of a Zoom call with a client when my phone buzzed, an email from a headhunter in Denver. Ms. Monroe, your name was recommended to me by James Martinez at High Desert Capital. We have a senior position that seems tailored to your expertise. The client is particularly interested in someone with Bancroft and Fairchild experience who understands their competition. Would you be open to a conversation? I read it 3 times before responding. James Martinez had been a client from the early days, someone who'd watched me build the Washington deal from conception to close. Someone who knew what I could do when I wasn't teaching overgrown children how to play executive. I'd be very interested, I typed back. When would you like to speak? The call came the next day. Keystone Ridge Advisory Group. Bancroft and Fairchild's primary competitor was expanding. They needed a head of strategic analysis, someone who could build a team from scratch and go toe-to-toe with the established players. To be frank, the headhunter said, they've been losing ground to Bancroft and Fairchild. They need someone who understands their competitor's playbook. I smiled for the first time in months. I might know something about that. The interview process was rigorous, 5 rounds, including a presentation to the board. But I was different now, harder, clearer. The soft edges that had made me a good teacher had been worn away, leaving something sharper and more strategic. We're impressed, the CEO told me during the final interview. Your freelance work shows adaptability, and your corporate experience speaks for itself. When can you start? 2 weeks, I said, already mentally packing my boxes. Anna drove me to the airport, my car long since sold to cover expenses. You sure about going back? She asked. I'm not going back, I told her, watching Redfield disappear in the rearview mirror. I'm going forward. She squeezed my hand. Give them hell. I planned to. But first, I had a department to build, a reputation to restore, and a market to conquer. Eric Dalton had taught me an invaluable lesson. In corporate America, being good at your job isn't enough. You have to be strategic. You have to be careful who you trust. And sometimes, you have to wait for the universe to balance the scales. Keystone Ridge Advisory Group occupied the top 5 floors of a glass tower 6 blocks from Bancroft and Fairchild. On my first day, standing in the executive conference room looking out at the Denver skyline, I could see my old building. It felt like looking at a former life through a telescope, distant but still in focus. Welcome to the War Room, said Patricia Vance, CEO of Keystone Ridge. She was everything Eric's father wasn't: self-made, strategic, and utterly intolerant of incompetence. I'll be direct. We've been losing market share to Bancroft and Fairchild for 18 months. I hired you because you know their playbook. Help us win. I'll need full autonomy to build my team, I said, and access to all current client data. Done. What else? A seat at the executive table. I can't strategize from the sidelines. She smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Your first executive meeting is tomorrow at 7. The next 6 months were a blur of 18-hour days, but this time, I was building something mine. I recruited talent from across the country, people hungry to prove themselves, not coasting on family connections. I implemented systems I'd designed but never been allowed to execute at Bancroft and Fairchild. We pioneered new analysis methodologies that made our proposals stand out. The Morrison account wants to meet. My senior analyst, David, told me one morning. They're unhappy with their current advisor. Morrison, my old account, the one that had walked after I left. Set it up, I said, already strategizing. The meeting was sweet vindication. The Morrison team practically begged us to take them on, complaining about the lack of personal attention and cookie-cutter strategies they'd been receiving. I didn't mention that I'd managed their account for 4 years. I simply showed them what Keystone Ridge could do. We won the account. Then 3 more from Bancroft and Fairchild's portfolio. Word spread that Keystone Ridge had a new player, someone who understood complex restructuring and actually delivered results. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it, Patricia said during my 6-month review. We've gained more ground in half a year than in the previous 2 combined. But the real satisfaction came from building a team that operated on merit, not nepotism. I promoted based on performance. I shared credit liberally. I created the department I'd always wanted to work in: collaborative, innovative, and ruthlessly effective. Rachel, we need to fill the strategic client manager position, my HR partner mentioned during a staff meeting. It's been open for 3 weeks. I know, I haven't found the right fit yet. We're getting resumes from some heavy hitters, even someone from Bancroft and Fairchild. My pen stilled on my notepad. Oh. Eric Dalton, impressive resume. Harvard MBA, director experience at 26. His cover letter specifically mentions wanting to work with our team. I kept my face neutral, years of corporate poker paying off. Interesting. Forward me his application. That night, I sat in my downtown apartment, a far cry from the one I'd lost, but mine nonetheless, staring at Eric Dalton's resume. It was polished, professional, and full of achievements I recognized. My achievements, repackaged with his name. Strategic Planning Director. Bancroft and Fairchild, 2024-2025. Led successful 50 meters towards restructuring of Washington Technology's account. Innovated new financial modeling techniques that increased department efficiency by 40%, managed team of 12 senior analysts. Every bullet point was a ghost of my work, haunting me from a PDF. I pulled up LinkedIn. Eric's profile told the story between the lines. 6 months after taking my job, he'd been quietly demoted to senior consultant. 3 months later, He'd left Bancroft and Fairchild entirely. His recommendations were sparse, generic, clearly written as favors rather than endorsements. Tough break, I said to my laptop screen, feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction but wasn't sympathy either. The next morning, I called Patricia. I need a favor. Can you find out why Eric Dalton left Bancroft and Fairchild? Unofficial channels. The CEO's son. Give me 2 hours. She called back in one. You're going to love this. Apparently, he bungled 3 major accounts in 6 months. Couldn't deliver without his support system. His father tried to protect him, but the board intervened. They gave him the option to resign or be terminated for cause. Interesting, I said, already thinking 3 moves ahead. You want to interview him? Oh yes, I said. I definitely want to interview him. I structured the interview process carefully. First round with David, my senior analyst. Second round with the team leads. Let him get comfortable, confident. Let him think he was walking into just another corporate interview where his name and resume would carry him through. David's feedback was illuminating. He talks a good game. But when I pressed on specifics about the Washington account, he got flustered, kept redirecting to team achievements without explaining his actual role. The team leads were less diplomatic, arrogant, couldn't answer basic technical questions, seemed to expect the job was already his. Perfect. I scheduled his final interview for a Thursday afternoon, but I had one more piece to put in place. I want to add a practical component, I told HR. A presentation to the executive committee. Real-world scenario, complex restructuring. Let's see how he handles pressure. That's not standard for this level. We're not a standard company, I replied. And this isn't a standard hire. They agreed. After all, I'd delivered results. I'd earned the right to be particular about my team. I spent the next week preparing something special for Eric Dalton. A case study that looked straightforward on the surface but was riddled with traps, the kind only someone with deep financial knowledge would spot. False data points that sounded plausible, metrics that didn't quite add up, the kind of test that would reveal whether someone truly understood the work or was just parroting memorized concepts. My phone buzzed. An email from Eric confirming his attendance at the final interview. Looking forward to potentially joining your team. I've heard impressive things about the department you've built. I smiled, typing my response. We're looking forward to seeing what you can bring to Keystone Ridge. Please prepare a 30-minute presentation on the attached case study. You'll be presenting to our executive committee. I didn't sign my name. Let him walk in blind. The way I'd walked into that parking garage 6 months ago. Let him feel, just for a moment, what it was like to have the ground shift beneath his feet. The universe, as it turned out, had a sense of humor. And sometimes it delivered second chances wrapped in poetic justice. Thursday arrived wrapped in Denver's typical March weather, sunny but sharp, the kind of day that looked warm through windows but bit when you stepped outside. I dressed carefully. My best suit, the one I'd bought with my first Keystone Ridge bonus. Navy blue, perfectly tailored, a statement of authority I'd earned rather than inherited. I arrived early, setting up the executive conference room myself. Nameplates for the committee members, water glasses precisely placed, the projection system tested twice. I wanted everything perfect for Eric Dalton's grand entrance. The candidate's here, my assistant informed me at 1:55 p.m. Should I send him in? Give him 5 minutes, I said. Let him sit with his nerves. I positioned myself at the far end of the table, my back to the door, reviewing documents that didn't need reviewing. The other committee members filed in. Patricia, the CFO, the head of HR. I'd briefed them on the unusual structure of this interview, but kept my history with Eric to myself. This needed to be clean. At exactly 2:00 p.m., the door opened. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Eric Dalton, and I'm excited to... The words died in his throat. I turned slowly, meeting his eyes for the first time since he'd signed my termination letter. He stood frozen in the doorway, his practiced smile collapsing like a damaged spreadsheet. Please, have a seat, I said, gesturing to the presentation area. We're eager to hear your thoughts on the case study. He didn't move. His face cycled through emotions like a loading screen: shock, recognition, fear, and finally, a desperate attempt at composure. I didn't realize that I'd be conducting the interview. I kept my voice professionally neutral. I'm the head of strategic analysis here at Keystone Ridge. This position would report directly to me. Is that a problem? The committee members exchanged glances. Patricia leaned forward slightly, sensing undercurrents she couldn't quite place. No, Eric managed, his voice cracking slightly. No problem at all. He moved to the presentation area, like a man walking to his execution. His hands shook as he connected his laptop to the projector. The confident swagger I remembered was gone, replaced by something that might have been shame if he was capable of it. When you're ready, I said, clicking my pen. His presentation was a disaster from the first slide. The case study I designed was elegant in its deception. On the surface, it looked like a straightforward technology company restructuring, but I'd embedded false signals throughout: debt ratios that didn't match the industry, market projections based on outdated data, the kind of mistakes that would destroy a real client relationship. Eric had swallowed it all. As you can see, he said, pointing to a graph built on my fictional numbers, the optimal strategy is to leverage their existing debt at a 3.1 ratio. Interesting, I said. Can you walk us through how you arrived at that specific ratio? He fumbled through an explanation that revealed he didn't understand the underlying math. He was parroting terms he'd memorized, applying formulas without comprehension. Every question I asked stripped away another layer of his facade. The market data seems unusual, Patricia noted. Are you confident in these projections? Eric's Adam's apple bobbed. The data was provided in the case study. And you didn't think to verify it? I asked. In the real world, clients sometimes provide incorrect information. Part of our job is to identify and correct those errors. You've just recommended a strategy that would bankrupt this fictional company within 18 months. The room fell silent. Eric stood there, sweat beading on his forehead, his entire presentation unraveling. This was what he looked like without someone competent behind him: exposed, incompetent, drowning in water that wasn't even that deep. Let's move on, I said, my voice cutting through his stammered attempt at recovery. Tell us about your experience at Bancroft and Fairchild. Specifically, the Washington Technologies restructuring you led. It was a team effort. Of course. But as the lead, you must have deep insights into the strategy. Walk us through your thinking on the debt ladder approach. He tried. God, he actually tried. But every word revealed the truth. He'd memorized my presentations without understanding them. He knew the what, but not the why. When I pressed for specifics, he crumbled. Perhaps you could tell us why you left Bancroft and Fairchild, Patricia suggested, her voice deceptively mild. Eric's eyes darted to me, then away. I felt it was time for new challenges. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the recording app. Interesting, because during your interview with our junior staff, you had some rather specific comments about your time there. May I? His face went white. I hit play. Eric's voice filled the room, cocky and dismissive. The senior analyst I worked with was competent but limited. She couldn't adapt to modern strategies. I had to correct a lot of her work. Between you and me, that's probably why they eventually let her go. Some people just can't keep up with evolving markets. I stopped the recording. The committee members looked at Eric with expressions ranging from distaste to outright disgust. That analyst, I said quietly, built the Washington Technologies strategy from scratch. She created the debt ladder approach you just failed to explain. She trained you for 3 months, staying late to ensure you understood basic financial concepts, and then you signed her termination letter. Eric's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. But here's what really interests me, I continued, standing now. You submitted a resume claiming credit for her work. You sat in this room and presented strategies you don't understand. You lied about easily verifiable facts. So tell me, Mr. Dalton, what exactly do you bring to Keystone Ridge? The silence stretched. painful and complete. Eric looked around the room, searching for an ally, finding none. Even the water glasses seemed to judge him. "I think we've seen enough," Patricia said, her voice arctic. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Dalton." He started to pack up his laptop, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. As he reached the door, I spoke one last time. "Eric." He turned, hope flickering in his eyes. Maybe I'd changed my mind. Maybe this was all some elaborate test he'd somehow passed. "A word of advice," I said. "The next time you apply for a job, make sure you actually understand the work you're claiming as your own. Oh, and check who's conducting the interview." He fled, actually ran from the room, leaving behind a single page of his presentation notes. I picked it up, glanced at it, bullet points copied from my old files, complete with my personal notation system, and dropped it in the trash. "Well," Patricia said after a moment, "that was illuminating. I take it there's history there?" "He was a junior colleague at my previous firm," I said simply. "It appears he hasn't grown much since then." "Clearly." She stood, gathering her things. "I trust you'll handle the rejection notice." "With pleasure," I said, already composing it in my head. Professional, brief, and final. Everything his termination letter to me hadn't been. The committee filed out, leaving me alone in the conference room. I walked to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline. Somewhere out there, Eric Dalton was probably sitting in his car, experiencing what I'd felt 6 months ago. The difference was, he'd earned his humiliation. I'd simply revealed it. The rejection letter was already drafted in my system, polite, professional, and devoid of the personal cruelty Eric had shown me. But I didn't send it. Not yet. I had one more card to play, and it required careful orchestration. That evening, I called Patricia. "I need to share something about today's interview. It's relevant to Keystone Ridge's reputation. Come to my office." I brought my laptop, the recordings, and a file I'd been building since Eric walked into our conference room. Patricia listened without interrupting as I laid out the full story. My time at Bancroft and Fairchild, training Eric, the stolen strategies, my termination. He didn't just lie on his resume, I explained, pulling up side-by-side comparisons. He's been presenting my work as his own to potential employers across Denver. 3 other firms have contacted me for reference checks. Patricia's expression hardened. He's a liability. If we'd hired him, he would have imploded within months, taking client relationships with him. I opened another file. But there's more. During today's presentation, he revealed confidential Bancroft and Fairchild client information. The Washington Technologies details he bungled, those aren't public. He just violated his NDA. "You recorded the entire presentation?" "Standard procedure for executive interviews, as per our handbook." She smiled slowly. "What do you propose?" "A formal letter to Bancroft and Fairchild's board, alerting them to the breach, copy to their legal department, and perhaps a note to the Professional Standards Board about resume falsification." "That's thorough." "I prefer complete," I said. Eric Dalton built his career on other people's work. It's time he learned that foundations built on lies always crumble. Patricia signed off on the plan immediately. By Friday morning, letters were dispatched through official channels. By Monday, the fallout began. The first call came from James, my old supervisor. "Rachel, I owe you an apology. We've launched an internal investigation based on your documentation. The board is furious." "I'm not looking for apologies, James. Just accountability." Eric's father is stepping down. The board gave him a choice: resign or watch his son face legal action for the NDA violations. I felt no satisfaction, just a cold sense of balance restored. "I appreciate the update. Rachel, if you ever want to come back..." "I don't go backwards, James. Good luck with the cleanup." The Professional Standards Board moved more slowly, but more thoroughly. Eric's falsified credentials triggered a formal investigation. Word spread through Denver's financial community like wildfire. Within 2 weeks, Eric Dalton was unemployable in any legitimate firm within 500 miles. My team at Keystone Ridge watched it unfold with a mixture of awe and wariness. "Remind me never to cross you," David said, reading about Bancroft and Fairchild's public statement regarding recent personnel changes and renewed commitment to ethical standards. "Just don't steal my work, and we'll be fine," I replied, already focused on our next client presentation. 3 weeks after the interview, I received a LinkedIn message, Eric Dalton, from a coffee shop IP address. "Rachel, I know you won't want to hear from me, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I was arrogant, stupid, and wrong. You were the best teacher I ever had, and I repaid you with betrayal. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know." I stared at the message for a long moment, then archived it without responding. Some bridges, once burned, weren't meant to be rebuilt. A month later, I was having lunch with Patricia when she mentioned something interesting. "You know Dalton's son? He's working at a small credit union in Wyoming, entry level." "Good for him," I said, meaning it. Maybe starting from the bottom would teach him what I couldn't. That real expertise can't be faked, stolen, or inherited. "You're remarkably calm about all this," Patricia observed. "Most people would be celebrating." I considered that. 6 months ago, I wanted revenge. I wanted him to suffer like I did. But watching him destroy himself in that conference room, seeing him exposed for what he really was, I realized something. "What's that?" He was always going to fail. People like Eric, who take credit for others' work, who advance through connections rather than competence, they always collapse eventually. I just accelerated the timeline. "And got a front row seat," Patricia added with a smile. "That too." We returned to discussing legitimate business, new clients, expansion plans, the future we were building at Keystone Ridge. But as we walked back to the office, Patricia asked one more question. "Any regrets?" I thought about the 7 years at Bancroft and Fairchild, the career I'd lost, the months of struggle in New Mexico. Then I thought about where I stood now, stronger, smarter, and surrounded by people who valued competence over connections. "No," I said, meaning it. Everything happened exactly as it should. The elevator doors closed on Patricia's knowing smile, and I rode up to my floor, my team, my department, my future. Eric Dalton had taught me an invaluable lesson about corporate life, though not the one he'd intended. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying someone else. It's about building something they can never touch, becoming someone they can never be. It's about turning their betrayal into your beginning. My phone buzzed. A new client referral. Another former Bancroft and Fairchild account looking for better service. I smiled, walking into my office to prepare for the call. Eric might have ended my first career, but he'd inadvertently launched my second one. And this time, I wasn't training anyone but myself. The view from my window showed the Denver skyline in full afternoon glory. Somewhere in that maze of glass and steel, Bancroft and Fairchild was learning the cost of choosing nepotism over merit. And somewhere far from here, Eric Dalton was learning that in the real world, without someone else's wings, you can't fly. I picked up the phone, ready to build something new on the ashes of what he'd burned. After all, the best revenge is a life well lived. And mine was just getting started. The formal rejection letter went out the next morning, but I wasn't done. Not quite. There was one final piece of this puzzle that needed to be placed, one last lesson Eric Dalton needed to learn. I called a meeting with my team that afternoon. "We're implementing a new policy," I announced. "All interview presentations will be recorded and archived. All references will be thoroughly verified, and any candidate who falsifies credentials will be reported to the Professional Standards Board." "That seems thorough," David commented. "It's necessary," I replied. "Integrity isn't just about what we do for clients. It's about who we allow into our organization." The policy memo went out company-wide that day. Patricia ensured it was also shared with our industry partners. Within a week, 3 other major firms had adopted similar measures. The Dalton Protocol, as it became known in HR circles, made it significantly harder for frauds to slip through the cracks. 2 days after the interview, I did something I hadn't planned. I pulled up Eric's rejection letter and added a personal note at the bottom. Eric, you once asked me to teach you everything about this business. Consider this your final lesson. Competence can be taught, but character cannot. You had 3 months to learn the former and a lifetime to develop the latter. You failed at both. The strategies you claimed as your own have evolved far beyond what I taught you. The financial models you memorized are outdated. The industry has moved forward while you remained stuck, parroting words you never understood. But here's what you never learned. Despite all those hours in my office, real success isn't about taking credit. It's about creating value. It's about lifting others as you climb. It's about building something that lasts longer than your last lie. You ended my career at Bancroft and Fairchild with a signature. Today, I returned the favor. The difference is, I used truth where you used deception. I used competence where you used connections. I built my revival on merit while you built your downfall on myths. This industry is smaller than you think. Every bridge you burn lights the way for others to see who you really are. Thank you for the lesson in corporate warfare. Thanks to you, I learned to protect my work, document my achievements, and never underestimate the damage an incompetent person in power can do. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the best thing that can happen to a career is having it destroyed by someone who could never deserve it. Enjoy Wyoming. Rachel Monroe, Head of Strategic Analysis, Keystone Ridge Advisory Group. I sent it before I could reconsider. Some messages are meant to be delivered. Consequences be damned. My phone rang an hour later. Unknown number. Wyoming area code. I let it go to voicemail, then deleted it without listening. Some conversations were finished before they began. That evening, I stood in my office as the sun set over Denver, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. The city lights began their nightly emergence, each building a constellation of ambitions and failures, triumphs and betrayals. My assistant knocked. Rachel, the Morrison team is here for your 5:30. Send them in, I said, turning from the window. As I shook hands with clients who valued expertise over connections, who chose Keystone Ridge because of what we could do rather than who we knew, I felt the last weight of Eric Dalton's betrayal lift from my shoulders. He'd tried to bury my career, but careers, like phoenixes, sometimes need to burn before they can truly soar. He'd stripped away everything I'd built at Bancroft and Fairchild, forcing me to discover what I was capable of when I had nothing left to lose. The meeting ran long, but I didn't mind. This was what I loved: the complex problems, the elegant solutions, the moment when a client's eyes lit up with understanding. Eric had taken this from me temporarily, but he'd never understood its value. You can't steal what you can't comprehend. As the Morrison team left, effusive with thanks and eager to expand our engagement, my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. Eric's profile had been updated. The Harvard MBA was gone. The director title erased. In its place, Financial Services Associate, Wyoming Federal Credit Union, starting fresh and learning every day. Perhaps there was hope for him yet, or perhaps it was just another performance, another costume worn by someone who'd never learned to be himself. Either way, it was no longer my concern. I shut down my computer, gathered my things, and headed for the elevator. In the lobby, I passed a group of young analysts heading out for drinks, their animated conversation full of ambition and dreams. One of them caught my eye, a young woman with the same hungry look I'd had at her age. Ms. Monroe, she said, stopping mid-stride. Could I ask you something? Of course. How did you do it? Build all this, become who you are. I thought about giving her the standard answer. Work hard, stay focused, build relationships. Instead, I told her the truth. I learned that success isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being the most reliable. Do what you say you'll do. Take credit for your wins and ownership of your losses. And never, ever let anyone else's limitations define your potential. She nodded, absorbing the words like I'd once absorbed everything I could learn. One more thing, I added. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. It'll save you a lot of trouble down the road. I left her pondering that, pushing through the revolving doors into the Denver evening. The air was crisp, full of promise and possibility. Somewhere in this city, Eric Dalton was probably updating his resume again, trying to reinvent himself one more time. But I was done thinking about him. My phone rang. Anna, calling from New Mexico. "How was your day?" she asked, our nightly ritual since I'd lived in her spare room. "Good," I said, meaning it. "Really good." "Any word from that asshole who fired you?" I smiled, hailing a cab. "Who?" And in that moment, I meant it. Eric Dalton had been a chapter in my story. But chapters end. The book of my career had many pages left, and I was the only one holding the pen. The cab pulled up to my apartment building, and I rode the elevator to my floor, thinking about tomorrow's challenges, next week's opportunities, next year's possibilities. Eric had given me an unintended gift, the knowledge that I could survive anything, rebuild everything, and come back stronger than before. Some people enter your life to teach you how to love. Others teach you how to laugh. Eric Dalton taught me how to fight, and more importantly, how to win. The war was over. I'd won not through destruction, but through construction, not through revenge, but through success. And that, more than any rejection letter or professional disgrace, was the ultimate victory. I poured a glass of wine, raised it to the window overlooking the city I'd conquered twice, and toasted the only person who'd been there through it all, myself. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below, and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts about workplace betrayal and comeback stories. Have you ever had to rebuild after someone tried to tear you down? Let me know in the comments.